again, thank you so much for your tremendous support. We've been able to accomplish so much together over the last number of years. I'm sure that many of you have had the experience of finding that you've needed the services of one or more of our hospital sites and been relieved to be able to enjoy the facilities that have been constructed at Hotel Dieu for outpatient clinics and for various areas in the Kingston General Hospital site. And if you haven't yet had the opportunity to take a look at Providence Care Hospital, it's quite a spectacular setting. While I hope none of you ever have need of hospital care at any of our sites, I do want you to have the opportunity to just appreciate all that the gifts that you and others have given has contributed to healthcare and the healthcare experience in our community. I think that you're aware that our hospitals serve more than 500,000 people across southeastern Ontario, and as an academic health sciences centre associated with the Faculty of Health Sciences at Queen's, our hospitals provide a level of specialized care that is not available to us at partner hospitals in the region that deliver secondary care. And we're delighted that we have with us today both Kathy Szabo, President and CEO of Providence Care, and David Pecora, President and CEO of Kingston Health Sciences Centre. And I'm going to invite them to each come up to just say a few words, and then we'll get into our prepared talks. Kathy?
Thank you. I can come this way? Thank you so much, Denise. I echo Denise's heartfelt thanks for all your generous donations to Providence Care. Our hospital is a testament to how this community has come together to make sure that we have the right type of facility where people can come and have their health restored, or people can come and get the kind of care that they need and live a full life. We are indeed blessed that Providence Care does not only include our hospital, but also includes the other 22 community services that we have and Providence Care Manor. We are pleased to be able to continue to work within our community to meet the needs of the people that need health care, and are very thankful for your generosity. So my little pitch is thank you, and please continue to be generous. I know Kingston can, and I appreciate the time and effort that you've given us over the last few years. Thank you.
And come on up, David.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks to all of you for coming. It's a real delight to be here today and to welcome all of you here, and thank you for your support to our hospitals. On Friday, we had the pleasure and privilege of hosting our new Minister of Health at Kingston Health Sciences Centre at the KGH site, and when she walked in, she was sort of looking around and remarking at the age of the building, and I said to her, well, the KGH is actually the longest continuing operating hospital site in the country, and Hotel Dieu is number 2. And so as Kathy was saying, we have a responsibility, and Denise as well, to provide complex and tertiary care to Kingston and the area, but also to our entire Southeast Lynn and eastern part of southeastern Ontario. And so it's a big mandate to provide this sort of high quality care and to be able to attract and retain the kind of physicians, specialists, and other health professionals that contribute to these kinds of programs. And it's critical that we have the resources needed to do that. And Troy will be talking to you a bit about a few of those things in a few minutes. But you know, in the last year, we've taken on a new, really life-changing program in stroke therapy, just as one example of the opportunities that are out there now, and be able to turn around people who would otherwise be looking at a very definite, different lifestyle in the future, to be able to do a procedure that they can get up and walk home just the way they were before they came in. It's really remarkable that we're able to do this kind of thing now. But investing in our facilities is something that's critically important, and redeveloping at our KGH site in particular for new ORs and diagnostics and labor and delivery and neonatal intensive care are really important things for the future, to be able to sustain and grow the programs that we all count on. So thanks for coming. Thank you for your support, and I'll get out of the way so Denise can carry on the program.
So I'm really excited about the program that we've put together today because you're going to have the opportunity to meet some people that you don't very often see presenting to our donors on behalf of the foundation. And they each play a really interesting and important leadership role in an aspect of thinking about how our Health Sciences Center and Providence Care will deliver care to the community in the future. They're constantly thinking about what can we do to take the next step forward. So the first of our speakers is Troy Jones. Troy Jones is the Kingston Health Sciences Center Executive Vice President and Chief Information Officer, and he is responsible for the vision, strategy, and execution of that strategy for clinical labs, pharmacy, diagnostic imaging, clinical engineering, information technology, privacy, project management, decision support, registration, and health information services. It's amazing he has time to go home at night. So Troy, if you'd like to come up, he's going to be the first of our presenters.
So thank you very much for the lovely introduction and for giving me the opportunity to brag a little bit about what my portfolio does to support care at Kingston Health Sciences Center. So, and you may find it ironic, but I'm used to a teleprompter in front of me, so I've gone Windows Classic here. I've got some paper notes just to help us along. So, as Denise said, I've got some accountability for 3 areas that are clinical, but for today's talk, I'm really going to try to focus on some of the people that you don't necessarily think about when you think about healthcare, and some of the work that they do at Kingston Health Sciences, particularly in the technology and innovation or information space. So I would venture to guess that if we asked people in the room today to conjure up an image of what it looks like when you walk through the front door of either the Hotel Dieu or Kingston General, that you're probably going to think about these people. So you might think about yourself or family members where you've been rushed into emergency. It's a particular busy day with 3 waiting to get in. You might think about surgical care that happens both in the OR theaters at the Dieu or at the Kingston General site. Or you might think about some of the newest members of your family and their entry into your space and our space. Now, I picked those 3 not just because they are 3 of the areas that need to be redeveloped as part of our phase 2, but they're also 3 areas that heavily rely on information and technology to deliver the type of care that we offer. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to set aside those common images for a minute and to start thinking about what's it actually look like, or what's this particular clinician looking at on the other side of the screen, and how do we make that happen at Kingston Health Sciences? So this is an image that somebody with my background might think about when we think about healthcare in Kingston. This is just a small set of a room that we built during some of the redevelopment when Kristen team helped us rebuild the cancer wing. And these are actually the wires that help support the images to support your diagnosis, to help with treatment planning, help to administer radiation, help to plan chemotherapy. So really, when we talk about transforming care together, how do we think about technology? We think about technology as helping transform the way we work. We think about it improving care, saving lives, and of course, because we're fiscally minded, we want to try to improve cost as well. But it can also increase the speed of transmission of important information in the hospital, which helps to improve care and reduce errors. So one of my quotes that I'm passionate about is that technology is actually really about people. It's not about the hardware and the software. In fact, at Kingston Health Sciences, probably 75 to 80% of what we spend as we think of dollars on technology, it's really to support the people, making sure that that technology effectively gets used for patients and family-centered care. So I'm going to just take a few moments and talk a little bit about the Chief Information Officer team and who makes that up. So first of all, as Denise said in comments, clinical engineering reports to me. So these are the people that look after any piece of medical device that if you happen to have the need to be in the hospital and it attaches to you, these guys make sure that it's working properly for the care team. But what's interesting in this space is what used to be just a glucose meter or a thermometer or an infusion pump is now heavily IT enabled. And so they're working pretty constantly with the information technology team that keeps all the network and the communications up, as well as the systems that talk to each other. Health information services is what we would have traditionally thought of as medical records, but with the advent of technology and the change in funding, their role is pretty critical these days to make sure that we've got the right information to not just deliver care, but to be responsible to the dollars we receive. They partner with another team, Decision Support. So if you've been on Kingston Health Sciences website and you've seen some of the indicators that our board pays attention to that we publicly report, these are the people who help make sure that what we say we're going to do, we're really doing, and that we're being held accountable. And then, of course, with all this technology and collection of information, most of us have seen in the media of late what can go wrong when information gets out of control. So we also have a very sound privacy office to make sure that we can protect that information on behalf of patients. And then lastly, we have a project team that works heavily with the facilities team to sort of make some of the changes that we're going to talk about. Excuse me. So I talked a bit about team. The reality is the better collaboration we have when we're putting this type of technology in, and that collaboration includes with patients and families, the better adoption we have. So when you look around this table of people, and this happened to be some folks who worked on some lab technology that we'll talk about in a minute, it's hard to distinguish the clinician from the technology person. We actually think that's a good thing because they're all working together to achieve a goal. So a second favorite quote of mine is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So what I'm going to do now that I've sort of laid out some of the stuff that we do in the technology space, I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 examples where we've tried to make magic, if you will, at Kingston Health Sciences, and talk a little bit about how this team comes together for patient care. So the first one, in terms of patient safety, this device down here is called a PCA, or a patient control anesthesia machine. And what it does is it allows you to control the amount of medication you're getting, typically post-operatively, where you're under pain, and so you can squeeze a little ball and it'll give you a little bit of medication. And normally, it's not uncommon for those to sort of just be a standalone device. But one of the things we did at KHSC is we actually connected that to those wires that I showed you earlier on in the slides. And so what this does, this little device, while it's hooked up to a patient, is it's communicating wirelessly, just like your phone would or your device at home, and it's pulling down a whole bunch of information. What that does is it allows the clinician who's setting up your drug therapy for your pain control to make sure you're not going to be overdosed, that you're adhering to clinical standards. And we know that since we put this system in place, which we've had for a number of years, that we have less errors and higher quality for patients. The next one is there's a lot of areas in terms of diagnostic and treatment. Dr. Pecor in his opening remarks talked about some of the new stuff we're doing with EVT in interventional radiology. But this equally extends to cancer, to surgery, to the ophthalmology program at Hotel Dieu, where there's a lot of technology to help give both visualization to the clinician, but also to help treat and diagnose the patient. So the next sort of whirlwind tour through the technology I'm going to talk about is the medical record space. So moving a little bit from those devices that are connected to patients and talk about the systems that clinicians are actually documenting about your care. So before we implemented our emergency department information system, between Hotel Dieu and KGH, we generally tracked about 88,000 to 90,000 visits a year on this, a grease board. So somebody would come in and you put a marker up and somebody would run back and you do that. Well, the opportunity to collaborate and adopt around the technology was to say, well, what if we did that different? So this is what our contemporary grease board looks like, if you will. And this system gives us real-time access to how long people have been waiting, what it is they're waiting for, when results come back, what the clinical team needs to do. And this is the type of information that's helped, along with a number of other initiatives, to help move the Kingston General site is now in the top performing emerge department in Ontario, based on some of the data that they were able to get out of this and then strategize about how to deliver care. It also does some great things for primary care and for patients themselves. This on the left-hand side is the old handwritten note that was hard to get your hands on, least of all read. And now it goes out in sort of a text to your primary care and to the patient themselves. They actually leave with a copy of this now. The other thing that we did is this is a fictitious patient named Angel Cake, no relation to me whatsoever. But EDIS was also able for us to start generating a non-handwritten lab label. And I'm going to use this. We have this now deployed at all of the Hotel Dieu and Kingston General sites because we had this other vision back in 2015. And we had a vision to start getting into some more advanced robotics. And one of the areas that we wanted to start that journey in was within our laboratory. So for those of you who are paying attention, I said I wasn't going to talk about the lab sort of part of my portfolio. I'm sort of breaking the rules a little bit through the technology lens. So in 2015, the instruments that actually test the blood that is drawn from a patient was end of life and needed to be replaced. And we had a vision that was mocked up by somebody. This is a computer animation drawing of what was just an idea in 2015, to put a robotic track in. So just to orientate you, on the sort of 3 o'clock side of the slide are the instruments that actually do the test. And the T that you see is actually a robotic track that moves that blood work throughout the system. This is the reality of what we were able to do. This is the colleague of mine in the yellow coat is actually taking specimens that are coming in from the patient care areas, putting it onto the track. And what the track does is it's always on. So 24 hours a day this is running. And what it does is the robot actually moves that to the most available instrument to get the blood work the fastest. We made this change, and some of our colleagues in Emerge said to us, I don't know what you're doing, but don't stop. Because our turnaround time got very, very consistent, which has led to a better experience for patients who are waiting for that test. Some of you will know 70% of every clinical decision that's made rests on a lab result. So this was pretty critical. Here's what that little tube looks like with the label on it. And this is the robot just about to set it down onto the track so it can go through the testing cycle. And so this is just not better care in terms of that turnaround time, but it's also allowed us to have a very efficient lab operation. So it's better care and better cost. What you might not have realized in these pictures is that this equipment has a brain. It's a technical brain. And this is actually that brain just as it arrives. So this is a combination of a power supply and a big computer that runs the lab. And it also has a heart, if you will. So this is the water supply and the pneumatic supply, the air that actually moves the robot through the system. And one of the biggest challenges we had was not just fitting that track into the lab, but actually trying to find the spot for this. Chris is smiling. She'll remember the days of trying to find in our old age buildings, how do you put in the sort of the heart and the brains, if you will, of that system. So that gives you a sense of some of the things that we've been working on with technology. I'm going to just talk briefly about some of our future things. So we've been working with the other 5 hospitals in the Southeast, talking about a vision that is represented by this graphic. What if we actually had one record, one system, and one patient experience? Because it's not uncommon, given the tertiary work that we do, that patients are coming to us from those other communities. And so what we've got is an agreement to move forward now with starting to look at how we would move on that one system idea amongst the 6 partners. And we know from literature that if you do things from sort of the quadruple aim, which we're talking about at Kingston Health Sciences as we embark on our strategic planning, that leads to the best outcomes. So I'm going to just share with you very early days from 4 different perspectives what we're hoping this system will do for patients and families. So one is that we envision that it'll improve transitions in care between organizations, as I've meant. It'll also decrease some variations in care because it'll help to standardize towards best practice. The care team is going to have access to higher clinical support. Medicine is increasingly complex, and it's very hard to keep up to date with all of the new practice models. So it's going to give them access to those, enable them to deliver standardized and improved care differently than today. We also see that there's a real potential for us then to start looking across the region. In Southeast, we're a very contained health system. And so this gives us the opportunity with one system to have that data to say, what are we doing that's working? And what do we need to change to get better? And then lastly is how do we improve from a value optimization perspective, how this system would help reduce some cost. So this is sort of in that example of the Emerge department system. It's kind of taking that same type of automation idea and moving it throughout Kingston Health Sciences with our regional partners. So we've learned a lot putting in the laboratory automation system. So two other things that are we're just starting to think about in the robotics and automation space are a surgical robot, so technology that'll help within the OR space. This is a pharmacy robot that will help with quality and speed of pulling drugs from inventory and reducing them and getting them to the floor. The interesting part about that is that it actually comes back to phase 2, to the type of things that we're asking people like you in the community to support. Because the space actually has 3 meanings relative to technology. One is, as I alluded to with the lab track, we need more contemporary space to actually fit this equipment in. The second is that there is a refresh of the main IT data center and infrastructure, which we also need to support moving forward. But the third is this space is being designed to really support collaboration. And remember, without that collaboration, we don't get the value out of technology. That's where we actually advance our thinking and get our work done. So facilities is pretty critical. So I want to leave you with my last quote, which is, remember, it's still magic, even if you know how it works. And just thank you for your time and, of course, for your support to the hospitals. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're on to Dr. Elizabeth Eisenhower. And Dr. Eisenhower is the innovation lead for Kingston Health Sciences Centre, which is a relatively new role and one that she's helping to define as she goes along. Dr. Eisenhower obtained her MD from Queen's University in 1976, and she subsequently received fellowships in internal medicine and hematology from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, Canada. From 1982 to 2012, she was director of the Investigational New Drug Program of the NCIC, which I believe stands for the National Cancer Institute of Canada, Clinical Trials Group at Queen's, and she led more than 170 clinical trials of new cancer therapies. From 2012 to 2017, she was professor and head of the Department of Oncology at Queen's and the Cancer Program Medical Director at KHSC. She's currently a professor emerita at Queen's University, and since January, she's been our innovation lead at Kingston Health Sciences Centre. For her contributions to research, she was awarded the O. Harold Wardwick Prize by the National Cancer Institute of Canada, the Society of Gynecologic Oncology of Canada Presidential Medal Award, the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, and in November, she received the Cancer Research Alliance Award for Exceptional Leadership in Cancer Research and was named an Officer of the Order of Canada for her contributions to clinical cancer care. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Eisenhower.
So thank you very much, Denise, and for inviting me, and thank you all not only for your contributions but for coming to share this nice luncheon. I'm about to go into a chocolate coma, having just had that dessert. So if my words start to slur a bit, just give me a bit of insulin or something. So as Denise said, I'm going to speak to you about how the Kingston Health Sciences Centre is starting to think a little bit differently about creating an innovation portfolio. So this is a new role, although innovation is not new to the center and the university. It is newly created that there's a very part-time role as somebody who can lead the development of a portfolio of innovation to encourage, nurture, celebrate at all levels of the organization. So this is a new position I started after failing retirement in January of this year. And I think it's important to ask a few questions about why this and why now. So my take on this is as follows. Why are we calling out innovation by creating a space for it in the executive team of the hospital? Well, as a new entity, the Kingston Health Sciences Centre really needs to define its place in delivering timely, optimal healthcare for our community and region, at the same time as pushing the envelope to better outcomes for patients. So by highlighting the need for innovation, I think the leadership of the hospital is proactively declaring that it wants to have a positive role in change for good, or in trying to change for good. And I think at its essence, innovation is about change. And the corollary to not having innovation is to not change, which is to stand still. And frankly, in healthcare, if you stand still, you move backwards. So I think it's really important that this idea has been sort of solidified into a new role. So if we're thinking about putting together a portfolio of innovation at Kingston Health Sciences Centre, what is this for? What are the goals of the portfolio that will come to be in the months ahead? Well, as its primary role, it needs to be driving towards improving health outcomes for patients, but also for populations. I think we also would agree that we need to somehow take a look at the value, what we're getting for what we're spending at some of the things we're doing. Are there ways to improve the value behind some of the healthcare offerings we give? Improving patient experience and increasing, I'm hearing, access to the appropriate care in a timely way. We want to be part of the implementation and spread of new programs that we know work, not just within our hospital, but within our region. This is a great opportunity to engage and excite medical staff, support staff, and all of the people that toil within the walls of the hospital and the Faculty of Health Sciences. But finally, it's also to proactively identify how we will work differently with partners, be they other hospitals, be they community organizations, but government, industry, vendors, and donors. So those are the goals. And when you start to talk about innovation, somebody said to me, well, innovation's a rather tired word. That being said, a lot of people really do understand that the ideas or the push towards innovation is kind of consuming a lot of thinking about healthcare right now. So what does it mean depends a little bit on who you ask. And these are some of the things that I've had feedback on as I've gone around making my first series of interviews, rather like a blind man and the elephant. So innovation, for some, means really development of new programs, new technologies. That sort of some of those robotics that Troy just mentioned to you would be an example of that's what innovation is, according to some. Others are talking about using an innovation portfolio to address what we see are problems in our health system, problems for patients as they transition between tertiary and primary care, problems between access and information flowing, wait times comes up again and again, and as you will know, not uniquely here, but across the country, wait times are in the news frequently. Others see this as an opportunity to develop new economic models for care, partnerships around investment in digital health, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and there's lots of examples of this out there with companies like Google that haven't really been part of the healthcare space suddenly getting involved in thinking about what is it that clinicians and providers and patients need to be a bit of a glue between when they're at clinic appointments and at home, to monitor chronic conditions so that flags can go up if someone's in need, so you can avoid going to the emergency room, that kind of thinking. improving efficiency, increasing sustainability of the healthcare system. Costs just go up and up and up. This might not be endless if we can figure out how better to deploy precious resources. And finally, improving outcomes. So a frequent discussion that I've had as I've begun this work is really, what's the difference between research and innovation? Aren't they kind of the same thing? And so I kind of made this visual of a continuum between research and innovation, where research would really be comprising things such as basic discovery. It also includes the first developments of novel interventions or clinical trials, which I spent 30 years of my life doing. When we start to move into innovation, we're starting to talk about translation and implementation of what research has taught us, early translation into practice and policy, early technology evaluation, spread, uptake, adaptation, and finally, new partnerships or models of care delivery. And so that continuum between very basic discovery and how we deliver care, there's obviously a gray area between those two where research and innovation meet. And I'll come back to this, but some call this early translation kind of that capital I innovation, the things that people get really excited about, what robotics or artificial intelligence might bring. But equally important are importing and spreading and adapting and sustaining the types of innovations that make a difference outside of an academic center to all of the providers and places in your region that could benefit from it. So what have I been doing since I started? Really talking to people. The part one has been really interviewing people, hospital leaders, medical administrative, patient and family advisors. I've spent time at their meeting, university leaders, LHIN and community partners, as well as external experts, Toronto, Ottawa, London. And I've asked them all more or less the same kinds of things. I've asked them about, how would you define innovation? And if you saw a draft of the Kingston Health Sciences Centre Innovation Portfolio, what do you think ought to be the 2 or 3 key things that you can find somewhere in there that really means we've got it right? I've also asked them how limited or how wide the scope of this work should be. Should we be focusing on the 4 walls of the institution, virtual walls of the institution, or should we be thinking more broadly outside the hospital into university community and LHIN? I also felt, we're not the first person, or I'm not the first person, we're not the first institution to be thinking along these lines. What are some great examples of places that have done this, and what can we learn from their experience, and what advice would you give me? So the kind of feedback I've got really around that first question, what is innovation? And this came from my interview with Troy, thank you very much. He sort of conceptualized innovation in 3 categories, and this resonated with me and pretty well everyone I've talked to. That capital I, truly new stuff, that's the early translation, that's really about moving the needle forward in patient care and patient outcomes. And it could be novel ways of approaching a disease or technologies, but it also could be really exciting, different ways of doing emergency care, for example. The importation, adaptation, and spread of things that have been shown to work elsewhere, and then more at the, I would say, micro level sometimes. How do we innovate in the things that we've always said, oh, we do this the same way, we've always done it for 50 years, we'll never change. How do we pull that apart and create quality improvement work within the institution? And there is a portfolio for that work going on. I've spoken to, I guess, about 10 people outside of the institution, in Toronto, mainly in Toronto and the UK, and the key messages I've heard from them are that innovations in models of care could be the most transformative or important work we could do. Seeing our Southeast LHIN as a kind of a laboratory or a crucible for truly innovative care delivery work. There was reference to this 70-20-10 model I'll show you in a minute that has a lot of appeal. But some people pointed out that there's some really important factors for success you need to get buy-in, not just from leaders, but maybe from the young, hungry, forward-looking staff at all levels of the organization about where you need to go and engage them in ways to get there. We need data to help us understand not just what the problems are, but what's at the root cause of problems we want to fix through innovation. Clearly, alignment and support from the hospital board and CEO, and thinking always about what is our mission and how does innovation enable that. Now, I referenced this 70-20-10 model. This came from a slide presentation that Helen Bevan, who is the Chief Transformation Officer of the National Health Service in England, shared. And it reflects the fact that in many businesses, there's this golden ratio of 70-20-10 in terms of the time that you might spend on things being 70%, 20%, and 10%, but the transformative ability of those is in the reverse order. And so if you applied these to a Mercedes-Benz or another car manufacturer, the core work optimizing that you spend 70% of your time on is going to be improving your sedans, and the adjacent work might be developing SUVs, and the transformational work, although you wonder about it these days, is self-driving cars. And if you turn that to the healthcare sector, the core work is quality improvement. The next level adjacent work is spreading stuff we know works and thinking in novel ways of getting that information out and implemented. And the transformational work might be that capital I innovation. So what next? The model of our information portfolio is starting to take shape. There's no big reveal planned for right now. But I think the recommendations that I will make to the executive and through them to the board will likely include all three types of innovation. It will likely include proactively seeking out the relevant partnerships to connect those dots together. And I will be testing the kinds of ideas coming from the interviews I've had so far further within the hospital, the community, the LHIN, and other potential partners. So this is very much the beginning of something, but I think, Denise, you wanted people in this room to hear about how we're trying to put our brains into gear to think differently about all the work we do. Thank you.
And it's my pleasure to invite Krista Wells-Pierce to come forward, and she's going to talk with us a little bit about the role that space plays in advancing the practice of care. Krista is the Vice President, Planning and Corporate Support Services at Providence Care, a graduate of both Queen's University and the Master of Health Services Administration program at Dalhousie. She spent the last 16 years. She looks young for 16 years, doesn't she?
Thank you for saying that.
16 years planning for the 3 Kingston hospitals, and she has a wide variety of experience in all healthcare sectors, including acute, subacute, and ambulatory care, specialized mental health and forensic services, long-term care, and research facilities. Krista is also a LEED Green Associate, and I believe that stands for
Leadership in Energy and Environmental
There we go. Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. She led the Build Finance Redevelopment Project at KGH that was completed in 2011, and she recently completed the Providence Care Hospital Design, Build, Finance, Maintain project, which is the first of its kind in Canada to fully intermingle rehabilitation, complex continuing care, and specialized mental health services in a single facility. In addition to her role at Providence Care, Krista also has responsibility for food and nutrition services, transportation and logistics, facility management services, information management technology, and quality and risk management. Over to you, Krista.
Thank you, Denise. Thanks, everyone. I'm happy that I followed Troy specifically because he did touch on technology, which is not my area of expertise, but I was asked to speak about radical redesign. Radical is relative, obviously. In the context of healthcare, it depends on the types of services you may have had an interface with, the facilities you have been in. So my conversation with you today will have different meanings for different people, I'm sure. Just a few examples. Post-SARS, back in 2003, we had to focus on putting hand wash sinks everywhere. And it was just craziness that we had to put all this plumbing in all of these buildings. And now it's not even a second thought. We start, in fact, in some cases, with where hand wash sinks are going to be located before we design the balance of a space. And robotics, as Troy has already mentioned, 10 or more years ago, we wouldn't have considered some of the types of robotics that we're considering now, and now it's quite commonplace in certain settings. So I am going to speak about Providence Care Hospital in the local context of significant radical redesign within the context of the care that we provide at that facility. Touch on privacy, a very quick glance at technology, because Troy has already stolen a little bit of thunder that I had in that slide. And then aging, and then the context for us to actually be radical in how we redesign our facilities within the Ontario context. So Providence Care Hospital, Denise has already mentioned what our vision was, but we did have a radical vision for the facility. We had a lot of conversation with the Ministry of Health to get them to appreciate the benefit of intermingling specialized mental health, complex care, and rehabilitation services under one roof. They were hesitant, I think is the word I could use. They were concerned about safety. They were concerned about the optics. And we said that's exactly why we want to do this, because we want to break down the stigma associated primarily at the time with mental health, but also the physical health challenges that a lot of our patients and clients deal with on a daily basis. Our design objectives really focused on that and how we could create a building that was a place of transition as opposed to an end destination for people. Our St. Mary's, former St. Mary's facility was the label of, it was your end point, and in some cases on our palliative care unit it obviously was. But we're focusing on transitioning people back into the community from all of our services, save and except palliative care. Some of the radical features within the building, not technologically radical, but relative, and I'll show you a few pictures of our former mental health site, and you'll see why we think we have made a radical change. The very first thing was having one entrance for everybody to come in. There are facilities in the province that provide similar types of services, but all the mental health patients go through a separate door. It actually makes me emotional talking about it. It was not within the purview of Providence Care to build a facility that's segregated, and we were very intentional on making sure we had one way in for everybody, regardless of why you're there. Similarly, shared outpatient waiting room. We don't have a waiting room for our mood disorders clinics that's separate from the waiting room for our geriatrics clinics patients and everybody in between. Everybody goes to one waiting room. You don't know why anybody else is there, but you're all sharing one space as opposed to having it segregated. I think most significantly, and certainly for Kingston, we have 100% private rooms. We don't have any shared bedrooms within the facility, and all of our bedrooms are the same size. So we had to go through lots of conversation with the Ministry of Health, who have a standard room size for mental health, that's 120 square feet, and a standard size for complex care and rehab, which is 180 feet, to get them to allow us to build a building where all of the bedrooms, because they are all private, would all be the same size. That allows us down the road some flexibility in the types of patients we can move around the building as we need to expand or contract the types of inpatient services that we provide. So it was very radical. It is an appropriate word in this case to get the ministry to think that way, and we were very invested in writing business cases to convince them that this was the way to go about our building. We have operable windows, not radical, but it's uncommon in healthcare for inpatient bedrooms to have operable windows, but for us to create that normalizing environment for the patients who are going to be with us in some cases for a significant length of time, to have the capacity to open their window in the spring and the fall was something that we fought for. Lastly, ceiling lifts from bedroom to washroom, and I'll talk to you about that. I'm going to show you a plan, which is right here. So this was another business case we had to write to the Ministry of Health. Their standard is there a pointer on this? No? Yes? Oh, it was there. Okay. So this is the bed in the bedroom. We're actually looking bird's eye view here. And typically the ministry allows for a ceiling lift to just be over the bed, and then the patient transitions from their bed using the lift into a wheelchair or whatever other means of transportation they need to use to get to the washroom. We wanted a ceiling lift that went from the bed right into the bathroom, over the toilet, and into the shower. Ministry said, we don't do it that way. And we said, well, we'd like to. So we gathered evidence, we worked up the business case, and they, after many months, said, yes, this is what we should be doing. We're the first hospital in Ontario to do this for all of our inpatient spaces, save and except a few of our mental health rooms because of safety concerns. There are a few down the road at Napanee and their bariatric rooms, but we have gone facility-wide for our complex care and rehab programs. Very significant in terms of eliminating back injuries for staff and eliminating the risk of fall, or mitigating the risk of falls for patients in only having to do the one transfer through the lift as opposed to multiple. This was a former group washroom in our former mental health facility. Multi-stall, multi-shower, multi-sink, nothing like doing all of those things with your friends on a daily basis. This was a former mental health wardroom, 5 beds in this case, at sometimes 8 in this room. So imagine dealing with mental illness with a whole bunch of strange roommates who you don't know, they're strangers to you, and you're trying to recover and get back on your feet and get back home. What is radical, I've already said we have private rooms. This is a new bedroom at our new facility. So we think that's pretty incredible. Save and except the teddy bear that was staged by the photographer. Makes it look like a pediatric room. But that ceiling lift that's in our complex care and rehab rooms, you'll see on the ceiling here, that's the track that goes from the outside of the bed in, and then this is the bathroom door. So we think that was pretty cool. In terms of privacy, one of the elements of the Phase 2 redevelopment at the Kingston General Hospital site has already been mentioned, the NICU. Dr. Pecora mentioned it. Our NICU right now is essentially a large wardroom, and all of the bassinets and all of the parents and all of the caregivers are in one large space, very, very, very crowded space. So in the new facility, the new NICU facility, we'll be going to private rooms, not unlike PCH, but for obvious reasons, the need to have quiet, the need to have a space for families to be in privacy will make all the difference. Mental health I've already mentioned. I just showed you that horrible wardroom, and the radical change in the ministry saying if you're suffering from mental illness and you need inpatient care, then you are going to get a private room, and that is standard. That's not unique to PCH. Universal rooms are also a thing that's sort of ebbing and flowing. They are very expensive, but it's essentially the concept that you're in a room and all the services that you could potentially need within certain buckets of care are there. So if your health declined and you needed to get to an ICU, you wouldn't in fact have to move rooms, go down the hallway, be seen by everybody. You would stay within the privacy of your bedroom, and all of the infrastructure that would be required could be accommodated to keep you in one place and maintain your privacy and the familiarity for your family to go to one room all the time. Emergency room design, another element of the scope of the Phase 2 redevelopment project at the KGH site. The standard room now has walls. It's not just curtains. So you can't listen to what's going on with your neighbor's life and their family life and whoever it is that's just beyond the cloth. The privacy associated with that in some incredibly traumatic instances in a person's life will be within the privacy of fixed walls, save and except our rapid throughput areas. And establishing separate circulation routes to make sure the public has a route that they go to access areas within a building. The support service traffic, getting linens and waste and all of our support service equipment being separated from the patient traffic, so getting from your bedroom to radiology as an example. At Kingston General right now, it overlaps. Doesn't lead to a great private experience for the patients and families in the building. In terms of technology, Troy already talked about the automation in the labs, the automation in the pharmacy. You'd think we would have planned this, but we didn't. And the automation in operating rooms, which Dr. Pecora could certainly speak to. The ceiling lifts I have already mentioned. As a technology, it's not a lot of wires going to a server room, but the equipment transformation that has happened to get folks from the bedside into the bathroom is obviously something pretty exciting. The photo that's there are automated guided vehicles that are actually being used at Humber River Regional Hospital in the GTA. They're being used to transfer stuff. So not people, they're not moving patients on stretchers down the hallway, but they're taking carts of supplies, waste. They speak with the elevators, and the elevators know when they're there and what floor they want to go to. Don't ask me how it happens, but they're using it, and it's certainly radical in terms of the speed with which items can be brought up to floors, and it's obviously a cost efficiency as well. In terms of aging, there has been just recently a lot of conversation in the news in Canada, which is great, about dementia villages. The world's first dementia village opened in Amsterdam in 2007. It houses just over 150 people on just under 4 acres. And the concept of a dementia village is to create a space that's familiar and that's safe for people who are suffering from dementia, to not make it look like an institution, and to get them together in a location where the staff can be trained in, obviously, the direct clinical care, but in caring for these folks in an environment that's not institutional. So I'll just show you a photo. This is the drawing of the village in Amsterdam. The perimeter of it is actually the perimeter of the building, which gets to, I believe on 3 sides anyways, the edge of the city block. So in lieu of having a property with a fence around it and a facility in the middle, they've actually used the building to create that boundary. These spaces in the middle are actually the open areas, courtyards. I'll have a photo that I'll show you in a second. But the principle is there's one entrance into this building, this facility, this village, and once you're inside, you have free reign to access the exterior spaces. Obviously shouldn't be going into your neighbor's room, but it's creating the concept of a village to keep people safe, but do it in an environment that's familiar to them and is not institutional. So you'll see this is one of the courtyards in the center of the facility. It is in Europe, so people do sit outside all year and do what they do, drinking coffee and whatnot. So they've designed it to have that same feeling. This is the outside of the building, as I mentioned, that serves as the perimeter for the village. And then down here in the bottom corner, there's a grocery store inside, a little shop inside the village. There's a cafe inside the village. There's an art center inside the village. So the concept is create a space that's familiar, and people will be able to live their life in familiar surroundings and have it be safe. There's also some conversation going on about whether this is akin to the colonies that were set up to treat people who had leprosy. And if there's something wrong with segregating people, and also an ethical conversation about whether building a village like this is misleading to the folks who could be cared for here, because there's a bit of falsehood associated with it. So it's not necessarily black and white yet, but certainly a significant redesign from the typical locked dementia unit in long-term care that we're used to. The good news is, if you saw it in the news, I think it's probably been about 3 weeks, potentially 4, since it was in the news, but there is a dementia village being built in Langley, BC, scheduled to open next year. Google it, it looks pretty neat. Providence Healthcare in Vancouver is also in the initial planning stages for a village there as well. A little bit closer to home, but not in the full concept of a dementia village, Georgian Bay Retirement Home in Penetang has a space that has been built and designed to feel like a 1950s, 60s era facility, equipped with similar furniture and interior design from that era. the idea that it brings about positive memories for people and can de-stimulate some aggressive behavior that can come with dementia. New homes, as we will be building for Providence Manor, include things like door masking, rummage rooms, different things that even 10 years ago weren't necessarily built in long-term care in Ontario anyways. This is a picture from Danish Deacon Home where I was in the fall. This is a memory room that they set up, vintage furniture from that period, cabinet in the back corner that has dishes and certain product boxes and wrappers from that area as well. And this is, I think this is the end of my slides. This is Dyersminda Care Home, just outside of Copenhagen. Radical in terms of its size. It is a home that's dedicated to very high needs dementia patients. They only have 10 beds in the home. The founder is an absolutely incredible woman. She's gone from begging and borrowing to build this 10-bed facility to now having donors knocking on her door, and they're expanding to build an additional 7 homes in Denmark over the next few years. Her philosophy is build a home that looks like a home, get patients off of all medically unnecessary medications. So if someone came with high needs dementia and had a heart condition, they're going to stay on their heart medication, but their antipsychotics, their sleeping pills, all of the things that are have been prescribed because of their dementia are eliminated through medical supervision, obviously. Her outcomes are spectacular. It was just an absolutely incredible place to visit. It's small, so from an efficiency perspective, in the context of Ontario, a bit of a challenge. And on that note, what we build within the healthcare environment in Ontario is standardized by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. Obviously, there are regulations for a reason. And our funding that we get from the ministry is directly tied to that standardization in terms of the type of space that the ministry will cost share in. The ceiling lift example I already used, we had to go through a lengthy business case development process to convince the ministry that it was a sound investment because it was going to eliminate back injuries and risk to patients from falls. As Troy has mentioned, the philanthropy from wonderful people like you make these radical redesigns possible, given the restriction that the ministry places on what they will and won't fund for us. And lastly, we are studying the baby steps that we make from a radical redesign perspective. Post-occupancy evaluations are a new norm within the context of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. When we're doing major redevelopment, the Canadian Standards Association is almost final in issuing their new standard for post-occupancy evaluations, and the intent is to look at how we did things before and then come back and study them in a new environment, like our ceiling lifts at PCH will be one of the things that our post-occupancy evaluation studies this fall, and all other elements of the building. That's it. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Krista. I'm mindful of the fact that our enthusiastic folks threw a few acronyms and little bits of jargon, and so I'm just going to decode. So you heard the reference to Phase 2 redevelopment. That's the bundle of projects that is planned for the Kingston General Hospital site. I think you're probably all aware that we have received funding to complete a functional program, which is now done, to remove 4 of our older buildings in the middle of the Kingston General Hospital campus, and to construct a new we're calling it a tower. That might be too grandiose a term. It's a multi-story building that will include emergency, new operating suites, a new neonatal intensive care unit, and an all-new birthing area, as well as and Troy spoke to this briefly, a very important data hub that will help us to move up to the next level of analytics and patient information flow through the hospital and beyond to our partner hospitals out in the region. The other area that we're focused in the years ahead is on creating a new facility to replace the facility that is aging and in need of replacement, which we call Providence Manor on Sydenham Street. We're going to be locating that facility out at Heathfield, which is the property owned by the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul. We are hoping that philanthropy will play a role that will allow us to build something more than a meets the ministry's standards kind of long-term care facility, and include some of these features that we've seen in Scandinavian countries and even in our own country, where private investment has helped us to create a model of care and an environment in which people can live, rather than it being an institution where they're cared for but don't have the kind of autonomy and independence that we would all like to have as we age. So with that, I am going to invite Mayor Jim Harrison forward. Mayor Harrison is here on behalf of Quinte West, the municipality in which he serves as mayor. And we've been talking with our friends and partners at a number of municipalities about the work we have planned for our hospitals and for our long-term care home. Mayor Harrison, I understand you're going to make an announcement.
Yes, thank you very much. I come from a municipality called Quinte West, and we believe Quinte West is the best. But just to comment on one of the first speakers saying that Kingston Hospital building is number one in age, I want you to know that from where I come from, the residents I serve, the health care that you provide here with all your facilities is number one. And I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to know and to realize that you're moving ahead at a pace that's acceptable to the people in Ontario in terms of the quality care that you want to provide and that you want to continue to provide. So it gives me pleasure to tell you that my municipality is supporting your innovations and your projects to the tune of $400,000, $80,000 a year for the next 5 years. Thank you very much.